Chapter 1. The Inciting Incident. I had scarcely returned to London from my latest assignment when I received an invitation to the private salon of Lady Havisham, whose soirees were whispered about for their opulence and exclusivity. The gilded drawing-room shimmered under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, their light refracting in thousands of dancing sparks across lacquered ebony panels. Silk-draped windows framed the midnight skyline, and the air was heavy with the scent of gardenias and rare cigars. I lingered beside a table of flutes, admiring the precision with which the champagne bubbles rose, when I noticed Hercule Poirot across the room, his posture as immaculate as ever, the famous mustaches impervious to time's slightest tremor. Before I could summon the courage to approach him, a sudden crash carved through the soft murmur of conversation, an explosion of crystal shards and gasps. I turned to see a young lady, pale as her ivory gown, retreating from the shattered remains of what had been a perfect champagne flute. But that was not all. A pool of a much darker liquid stained the polished mahogany sideboard. It was blood. Chaos followed. Guests recoiled, some pressing hands to lips in shock, others calling for the butler. Lady Havisham herself appeared at the threshold, her embroidered gown trailing behind her like a herald's cloak. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her rigid composure. I pushed forward, heart pounding. The crimson pool spread, a dreadful mirror to the brilliant opulence around us. A small, ornate dagger lay beside the broken glass, its handle engraved with the crest of the Sinclair family. The room froze, as if the chandeliers themselves hesitated in mid-sparkle. Poirot was at my side in an instant, his keen gray eyes drinking in every detail. He knelt, gloved fingers hovering above the dagger's hilt. "Mon ami Hastings," he murmured, "observe what appears obvious and what lies hidden. These guests believe they have come for entertainment. Yet fate has offered them a far darker spectacle." A low moan drifted from the far corner. We turned to see Lord Sinclair reclining against a velvet settee, one hand pressed at his side, his blood seeping through white silk gloves. His eyes met mine, panic and disbelief warring in their depths. "It was a flute," he gasped. "I touched it, and then I felt the blade. I did not see who—" His voice trailed into unconsciousness. Lady Havisham sank into a nearby chair, her face drained of color. "My salon, my reputation," she whispered. "What will become of it now?" The butler, gray and trembling, stammered that he had arranged for identical flutes, each engraved with the host's crest, and that Lord Sinclair's was nestled in a silver platter, indistinguishable from the rest. Yet only his instrument had betrayed him. The rest of us stood in stunned silence, torn between fear of the unknown assailant and dread for the gravely injured victim. As I knelt to examine the scene, I noticed a dent in the remaining glasses, a subtle imperfection near the rim, like a faint fingerprint from a careless craftsman. Only by tilting them toward the chandelier's light could one detect the slight warp in the crystal. Had the murderer tampered with the glass itself, or was something hidden within? Poirot rose, buttoning his perfectly starched jacket. "The instrument of death is often overlooked, Hastings," he observed, his voice a calm counterpoint to the pandemonium. "Here, the flourishes of luxury become the murder weapon. But why select a flute? Why not a blade more direct? There is poetry in this choice, a message, perhaps." He waved toward the silent guests, their faces now fixed masks of fear and suspicion. "All present are suspects, for all have access to these flutes, and all have reasons best known to themselves. In this room lie secrets darker than the midnight outside these windows." Lady Havisham, recovering some of her composure, curtsied before Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, will you help salvage my evening and my reputation?" He inclined his head. "Madam, my first task is to save a life, and then to unveil the truth." In that charged moment, as the chandeliers flickered and the night wind sighed through partially open casements, I sensed that this was no ordinary crime of passion or simple revenge. The elegance of the weapon, the exclusivity of the guest list, the precise timing, it all pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan. Each glass was a piece in a deadly puzzle. I glanced at the broken flute, its facets catching the light like cruel diamonds. Blood still clung to its edge. Somewhere in this room, among these faces painted with shock, was a mind that had conceived such a macabre twist on society's most innocent pleasure. The roar of approaching carriages below reminded us that the world beyond Lady Haversham's salon remained oblivious to the violence within. There would be official inquiries, police inspectors with sterner voices, but I knew that only Poirot's little gray cells could penetrate the layers of artifice and motive here. As attendants hurried Lord Sinclair to a discreet corner and guests murmured nervously among themselves, Poirot placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Hastings, my friend, tonight we dine on mystery. Prepare yourself." And so, amid crystal shards and the scent of spilled champagne, the affair began, the puzzle of the dented champagne flute and the question, who among us had inverted luxury into murder? Chapter 2. The First Clues. The great gilt doors of Lady Haversham's salon were closed and bolted, sealing us inside with the echoes of our own startled breaths. Inspector Japp arrived shortly after the carriage lanterns flickered on the cobblestones below. His brusque manner was a contrast to Poirot's measured poise, yet even Japp found himself deferring to Belgian's uncanny reputation. "No one leaves," Poirot declared, his voice calm yet absolute. "Every detail matters." I followed him back to the sideboard, where a fragment of crystal and a single silver flute gleamed among the stains of blood. Poirot crouched, careful not to disturb the scene more than necessary. He examined the broken edges, turning them under the chandelier's glow. "Note, Hastings," he said, tapping a gloved fingertip against an intact glass, "that only this flute bears a hairline fracture just above the stem. It is as though someone pressed too hard or applied a hidden tool before offering it to Lord Sinclair, yet the others remain flawless." I bent to inspect the other glasses. Indeed, a faint distortion, a minute bulge in crystal, marred two of them. One belonged to Miss Aldrich, who trembled nearby, and another to Mr. Pembroke, whose composure remained unerringly steady. How curious that Miss Aldrich's flute bore the same flaw, yet had not collapsed. Was it mere coincidence, or evidence of selective tampering? Poirot moved to the sideboard surface, brushing aside a loose ribbon of Lady Haversham's embroidery. There, half obscured, lay a small slip of paper edged with silver filigree. He picked it up gingerly. "A menu, Hastings, yet it is incomplete." He unfolded the card. The last 3 items have been torn away. "Look here. The final courses are missing. Could this be an attempt to conceal a poison recipe or instructions for a clandestine message?" His eyes flicked to each guest in turn. "Our culprit is careful." At that moment, Miss Aldridge let out a faint cry. She clutched her flute, stained not with her own blood, but with a smudge of what looked like grease. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Observe! Hastings! This mark is not blood. It is lamp oil or perhaps candle wax residue." He traced a fine line along her knuckles, revealing a hidden smudge of the same substance. She lifted her glass from that polished brass lamp beside the mantel. "Convenient, is it not? A red herring, perhaps, or a sign of genuine distress." A sudden clatter drew our eyes to the mantelpiece, where a single porcelain statuette teetered as though recently nudged. Poirot inspected its base. Tiny scuff marks revealed that it had been moved, just enough to unbalance the lamp, causing the wick to tilt and drip. The lamp oil gave the appearance of blood at first glance, misleading witnesses. "Ingenious," Poirot murmured. The perpetrator staged multiple clues to divert attention. But which is real? Which is smoke and mirrors? Meanwhile, Inspector Japp questioned Lord Sinclair, who had awakened and now sat propped in a velvet chair. His white-gloved hand rested over a carefully bandaged wound. His voice, though weak, was composed. "I touched the flute," he repeated. "Felt a sting, but I saw only the crystal shatter. I cannot say more." I noted his pallor, the tremble of his jaw. Was he masking fear or genuine confusion? Across the room, Mr. Pembroke appeared impatient. He tapped his cane against the carpet, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed space. "This is ridiculous," he said, eyes darting. "We are all being treated like common criminals." Yet when Lady Haversham reprimanded him for his brusqueness, he fell silent, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. Poirot watched him keenly, then glanced down to where the butler had arranged a fresh platter of untouched flutes. One glass lacked the Sinclair crest entirely. It bore instead the monogram H. "Ah!" Poirot breathed, A second monogram. Lady Haversham's personal glass. Why has it been placed among the guests' instruments? And why was it never offered at the moment of the incident? I bent to examine the scattered cards on a small table nearby. A single calling card lay face down, its backside smeared with a faint reddish tint. Not blood, but perhaps lipstick or wax. I flipped it. Lady Haversham's elegant script inscribed her name, but the edges were burned. An extravagance of misdirection, Poirot concluded. The culprit aims to frame Lady Haversham, or at least tarnish her reputation. Poirot rose and addressed the assembly. Mesdames et messieurs, I have observed several anomalies. 1. The intentional damage to specific flutes. 2. The torn menu, concealing something vital. 3. Smudges and burned calling cards, all designed to confuse. And 4. The monogram glass misplacement. These are not random. Someone wants us to suspect each other, and perhaps Lady Haversham most of all. Miss Aldridge's eyes filled with tears. I only reached for my glass when I heard him cry out, she protested. I had no idea. I believe you, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. But such theatricality can be weaponized. Remain calm, if you please. Turning to Japp, he added, Inspector, secure all menu cards and calling cards. Ensure no item is removed until I finish my inquiries. As the room stilled, Poirot beckoned me aside. Hastings, he whispered, we must speak with each person privately. Find out who had knowledge of Lady Haversham's new menu, who feared exposure, and who might benefit from Lord Sinclair's disgrace or death. I nodded, heart pounding with anticipation. Outside, the city's bustle continued unaware. Yet within these walls, a far more intricate drama had begun. Every shard of glass, every smudge, every torn scrap would guide us closer to truth, or deeper into peril, should we misinterpret the cunning design woven into this night of elegance and blood. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. By the soft glow of the crystal chandeliers, Poirot summoned the 6 principal attendees to the drawing room adjoining the salon. Each arrived with careful composure, though their faces betrayed tension beneath their polite facades. Lady Haversham, ever the gracious hostess, seated herself at the head of the rosewood table. To her right sat Miss Aldridge, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes red from tears. Opposite her was Mr. Pembroke, resplendent in his tailcoat, yet shifting uneasily in his chair. Lord Sinclair, his wound freshly bandaged, was escorted in on a crutch, pale but resolute. The butler, Mr. Hawthorne, stood at attention by the sideboard, and finally, Mrs. Valencia, Lady Haversham's longtime friend and confidant, took the last seat, her expression inscrutable. Poirot stood before them, his posture deliberate, his gaze sweeping the assembled circle. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, you are each witnesses, and perhaps instruments, of the events this evening. You will remain here until I have spoken with each of you privately. No one leaves, no one speaks of what transpired, and no one interferes with our inquiries. A hush fell. Even the crackle of the hearth seemed muffled in the charged stillness. Poirot motioned to Lord Sinclair first. Monseigneur, please recount precisely what you recall from the moment your flute shattered. Sinclair straightened, clearing his throat. I raised a glass, my own engraved with the Sinclair crest, and lifted it to my lips. The champagne's effervescence teased my senses, and then I felt a sharp sting at my touch. The crystal fractured, cutting my hand, and releasing a second blow as the dagger's tip emerged. I did not see the assailant. I saw only the weapon and the wound. He paused, eyes drifting to his own flute, now displayed under a bell jar. I remember no more. Poirot inclined his head. Thank you. You may remain. Sinclair sank back, breathing shallowly. Next was Miss Aldridge. She trembled but spoke with quiet determination. I heard the crash and rushed forward. I touched my glass. Mr. Sinclair's was on the sideboard, hoping to help. My hand slipped on something slick. It was wax, I'm certain, and the ribbon of the menu fell as I knelt. By the time I looked up, the blade was already withdrawn. Poirot nodded, folding his hands. You found the slip of menu. Indeed, but tell me, mademoiselle, Who among us had the opportunity to place wax upon your flute before the incident? Her eyes widened. I do not know. I did not see anyone near my place setting before the toast. Mr. Pembroke leaned forward, voice low. I did. I was nearby when Lady Havisham asked each guest to take up their glasses. I observed Miss Aldrich's glass, and I confess I noticed the wax residue then. I meant to warn her, but before I could speak, the crash occurred. Poirot's brow arched. You noticed the wax, yet did not speak until after the incident. Pembroke's cheeks flushed. I did not wish to offend, and I thought perhaps it was merely a stray drip from a lamp. Poirot's gaze flicked to Mr. Hawthorne, the butler. You arranged the glasses, monsieur? Hawthorne bowed. Yes, sir. I polished each by hand, until the moment of service. I would never allow a flaw to pass unnoticed. He hesitated. Until this evening, that is. And Mrs. Valencia, Poirot continued, turning to the lady in mourning silk. Your recollection? She offered a slight, courteous nod. I arrived late, catching only the final preparations. I stood behind Mr. Pembroke when the glasses were placed. I spoke briefly with Lady Havisham about the new flute engraving. She showed me the H monogram and mentioned it was a gift from a secret admirer. Nothing more. Poirot's eyes glinted. A gift, you say, one unknown to the rest of us? Valencia inclined her head. She wished to surprise her guests. I had no reason to suspect. Lady Havisham rose then, her composure regained. I intend to propose a toast to friendship and unity. The menu card, though incomplete, was meant to conclude with a verse of my own composition. It seems those lines were torn away, lines that praise loyalty and trust. Lines which someone sought to suppress. Poirot observed. He tapped a slender finger on the table. We have 6 witnesses, each with opportunity and motive. Lord Sinclair's injury weakens his claim to inheritance. Miss Aldrich's family stands to gain from Sinclair's misfortune. Mr. Pembroke seeks favor with Lady Havisham for his upcoming political appointment. The butler, though loyal, could be swayed by bribery. Mrs. Valencia may harbor unspoken resentments. And Lady Havisham herself. What better method to immortalize her poem than in the shadow of scandal? A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Havisham's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot allowed the silence to linger before speaking again. I will speak with each of you privately to explore your motives more fully. When I emerge, I expect full candor. The truth, once revealed, will be evident to all. He dismissed them with a graceful wave. One by one, the guests filed out, some with furtive glances, others marching out with steely resolve. Only Poirot remained seated, hands clasped atop the table. I took a place opposite him, heart hammering with curiosity. Now, Hastings, he said softly, we pursue the hidden strands beneath these polite exteriors. Observe how each departs. Sinclair in pain, Aldrich in fear, Pembroke in defensiveness, Hawthorne in dutiful silence, Valencia in discreet relief, and Havisham in wounded pride. Each reaction tells us as much as their words. I nodded. And the torn menu, the wax, the monogram flute, the misplaced calling card. Precisely, Poirot replied. The puzzle deepens. But rest assured, my friend, the little gray cells will illuminate the path. Let us begin with Lord Sinclair. As we prepare to question him once more, the salon door closed behind Poirot, sealing the chamber's secrets and ensuring that no detail, no gesture, no hesitation would escape our scrutiny. Chapter 2. The First Clues. Inspector Japp's heavy footsteps reverberated through the salon as he surveyed the scene with a blend of irritation and curiosity. Poirot remained by the sideboard, crouched beside the fractured flute and the dark stain that had turned champagne into crimson. "Attention, Hastings," he whispered, his voice barely above the susurration of silks. "Let's examine what the unobservant might miss." I joined him, noting the gleam of crystal shards beneath the chandelier's glow. Poirot tapped one jagged fragment with a fingertip. "Observe the clean break here," he said. The fracture lines converge at a precise angle, as if guided by a hidden weight. Someone manipulated this glass before presentation. He lifted the corresponding unbroken flute. See the faint abrasion just above the stem? A slip of the file, perhaps? Too subtle for most, yet evident to a practiced eye. My gaze shifted to the small slip of paper at Poirot's elbow. It was no ordinary menu card. Its edges bore the silver filigree of Lady Haversham's private stationery, yet the bottom third had been cruelly torn away. What might those missing lines conceal? Poirot mused aloud. A secret verse, or instructions to an accomplice? He slid the card into an envelope marked evidence, sealing it with crisp nod to Jap. Across the room, Miss Aldrich stood clutching her own glass, hands trembling so that the champagne sloshed perilously close to the rim. A smear of wax traced her fingertips. Poirot approached, peering at the residue. Wax from a mantel lamp, he declared. Our dear mademoiselle unwittingly handled a clue meant to mislead. The culprit sought to implicate her by staging the smudge. He traced the path of the wax from the lamp, a heavy brass piece with a curved wick guard, down to the sideboard. Nearby, Mr. Pembroke surveyed the scene with barely disguised impatience. His polished boots tapped the carpet. Poirot raised an eyebrow. You, monsieur. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. The hush that descended over the salon when the last guest departed into the adjoining drawing-room was broken by the soft click of a polished ebony cane. I turned to see Hercule Poirot step forward, his gait measured, his gaze sweeping the chamber as though reading invisible inscriptions upon the walls. Even in the dim aftermath of violence, he appeared the epitome of poise, his gray waistcoat perfectly aligned beneath the cut of his jacket, his cravat tied with immaculate precision, and those famous little gray cells already whirring behind his keen eyes. Inspector Jap, who had been barking terse orders to constables, paused mid-sentence. He straightened, pale lantern light glinting off his helmet. Ah, Poirot, he grumbled, relief mingling with exasperation. Glad you could join us. Poirot inclined his head with courtly grace. Mon ami, I arrived at the first carriage light. I trust you have secured the scene. His eyes glimmered as he approached the shattered flute. Very good. Nothing has been moved. Jap snorted. Nothing, believe me. Even the butler is on edge. Poirot nodded approvingly. Turning to me, he said in a stage whisper, Hastings, my friend, observe how the inspector still clings to certainty. Yet I perceive cracks in his confidence, just as there are cracks in this crystal. He tapped a fragment, then pocketed it in a small evidence bag. His movements were both methodical and theatrical, commanding every eye in the room. He raised his voice, addressing the half-circle of servants and constables gathered behind us. Mess Amos, I am Hercule Poirot. I have been asked by Lady Haversham herself to apply my methods to this most delicate affair. I shall require your absolute cooperation and your silence until I announce otherwise. A murmur of assent. Even the stoic butler, Mr. Hawthorne, inclined his head. Poirot pivoted, his gaze passing over each suspect's glass, still positioned exactly where it had fallen. He paused before Miss Aldrich's place, then before Mr. Pembroke's, and finally on the bell jar protecting Lord Sinclair's instrument. Notice, he began, how each glass tells a story. The oblique fracture on the Sinclair flute, the untouched monogram glass now inexplicably seated at Miss Aldrich's spot, the hidden dent near the rim of Mr. Pembroke's crystal. These anomalies are our first chapters. He strode to the mantel, hands clasped behind his back. And here, the lampstand's askew, its guard tilted just so to deposit wax upon an unsuspecting hand. The calling card, half-burned, lies in wait to mislead. Each staid detail is like a note in a symphony of deceit, but I seek the melody beneath. Lady Haversham, summoned back by a discreet cordon, entered with purposeful calm. Poirot greeted her with a bow. Madam, I beg your indulgence. May I inquire into your evening plans, your choice of toast, your intended menu conclusion? She recounted her carefully crafted verse, her eyes luminous with hurt over its mutilation. Poirot listened intently, nodding, while attendees peeked curiously through the salon doorway. Then, with all eyes fixed upon him, he pronounced, By 10 minutes past 9, this room witnessed an act of calculated malice. We have a crime, not of passion but of precision. The official detectives may seek a culprit quickly, but that is not my manner. I shall proceed slowly, allowing each detail to reveal its purpose. He tapped his temple. My little gray cells will guide me. He paused to survey the assembled suspects in the drawing room. Lady Havisham, resplendent in morning black. Lord Sinclair, hobbled but dignified. Miss Aldrich, trembling yet resolute. Mr. Pembroke, restless and watchful. Mrs. Valencia, serene but reserved. And the butler, Mr. Hawthorne, standing in silent loyalty. Each of you, Poirot declared, knows more than you have admitted, yet none shall rest until I extract the truth. Inspector Japp cleared his throat. You'll want statements, of course. Poirot waved a gloved hand. Statements are but words. They may disguise intent. I prefer interviews, quiet conversations, where nuance and hesitation speak volumes. He turned to me. Hastings, I shall require your assistance in observing these private moments. Take note of posture, of eye movement, of the very silence between words. I bowed my head. Though I had witnessed his genius before, each time Poirot assumed command felt like entering a new theater of intellect. He addressed the inspector once more. Japp, guard the doors. No one enters or exits except by my leave. And, essayez vous plate, fetch me the guest list and the new seating plan. Japp hustled off, leaving Poirot alone with us. Poirot removed a slender notebook from his pocket and opened it, jotting something under neat columns. I begin with Lady Havisham, he murmured. Then Lord Sinclair. There is much to probe in his recollection. After that, the others in order of opportunity and motive. He snapped the notebook shut. Now let us commence. Time grows precious, and the night is still young. And remember, he leveled a gentle gaze at Japp, the truth is often hidden in plain sight. With that, Poirot swept from the salon into the drawing room, inviting me to follow. In his wake, the servants resumed their hushed vigil, and a current of anticipation thrummed through the corridors. The game was afoot, and every player was bound to his stage. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Friends do not always wish to remain anonymous, especially when their gift becomes a vessel for murder. He watched her reaction. Valencia's steadiness flickered for a heartbeat before she regained composure. I assure you, my involvement ends with the gift. Poirot inclined his head. Très bien. Merci. She rose and glided away. Lastly, he spoke with Mr. Hawthorne, the butler, in the butler's pantry. Poirot observed the array of silver and crystal displays. You polished each flute by hand, yes? He said. Did you notice any imperfection or damage before service? Hawthorne's posture stiffened. No, monsieur. Each passed my inspection. I would never present a flawed piece. Yet tonight, flaws appeared, precisely those that mattered. Poirot tapped his temple. Tell me of any deliveries or maintenance to the salon today. Hawthorne's eyes flickered. A new batch of crystal arrived in the morning. I placed them in the cabinet. Later, I heard a faint scraping, but I assumed it was the upholsterer adjusting the settees. Poirot's gaze sharpened. An upholsterer? Who? Hawthorne swallowed. I believe it was Mr. Morton, who repairs Lady Havisham's furniture. He left just before guests arrived. Poirot straightened, his expression one of sudden purpose. Merci, monsieur. As Hawthorne departed, Poirot called me over. Hastings, note this. A craftsman with access and the tools to file crystal. We must locate this Mr. Morton. I scribbled rapidly, heart racing. Poirot surveyed the empty room, as though inhaling every residual detail. The interviews yield more questions than answers, he murmured. But piece by piece, the mosaic of truth will emerge. We left the drawing room together, the whispered rustle of silk receding behind us. Outside, the night wind rattled windows. Within, the strands of suspicion tightened, and our investigation truly began. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. The hour was late when Poirot and I returned to the salon, its atmosphere thick with unspoken fears. The guests had been permitted to reconvene under the watchful eyes of two polite constables, and each occupied a seat of our uneasy circle. Inspector Japp hovered near the sideboard, exchanging terse words with a uniformed guard. Poirot surveyed the assembly with his characteristic stillness, those little gray cells at work. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, voice smooth and measured. It is time to explore the most obvious suspect, the one for whom the evidence seems irrefutable. He paused, letting the silence expand. I referred Mr. Morton, the upholsterer. A hush fell. Mrs. Valencia's hand quivered on the arm of her chair. Miss Aldrich glanced toward the closed door, leading to the private pantry. Lady Haversham's eyes widened ever so subtly. Even Lord Sinclair stirred in his seat, crutch clattering against the parquet floor. Poirot gestured toward the door. This morning, Mr. Hawthorne confirmed that Mr. Morton was in the salon briefly, adjusting chairs and replacing a worn cushion. His tools, files, abrasives would allow him to create the imperceptible damage on the flute stems. Moreover, Mr. Morton's financial ledgers, I have learned, reflect recent debts. A profitable arrangement indeed, should he be bribed to sabotage a high society event. Inspector Japp straightened. We arrested him at his lodgings on Baker Street. He confessed when we found files bearing traces of crystal dust. Morton's entrance was dramatic. The constables ushered in a tall man in a workman's smock, his hands cuffed in front of him. His face was drawn, cheeks hollow, eyes fearful. He trembled as he caught sight of us. Poirot inclined his head in greeting, as if offering mercy. Mr. Morton, Poirot said, voice courteous, you have been accused of preparing this flute for the crime. He pointed to Lord Sinclair's glass under the bell jar. Explain the presence of crystal fragments on your workbench. Morton swallowed, glancing at Japp for encouragement. Yes, monsieur, I filed down some rough spots on the new crystal arrivals. I do this work every fortnight. A harmless task, I assure you. His gaze flicked toward the cupboard where the other flutes were stored. When the inspector found my files, I panicked. I thought they'd accuse me of something dreadful. I never meant any harm. Poirot's mustaches twitched. A prudent assumption for an innocent man. Yet you created indentations on every flute. Why leave the monogrammed H glass unblemished? Why target only those belonging to Lord Sinclair and those indistinguishable in placement? Morton's shoulders slumped. I don't know. I added file marks to the lot. I had no regard for monograms. I was under pressure, my daughter's medical bills. You admit intent to damage, Poirot observed. Yet you deny knowledge of murder. It seems you sought to spoil a party, not to shed blood. Morton's brow furrowed. Yes, I only wanted to disgrace Lady Haversham, force her to compensate me. I never wished to harm anyone. Japp's voice was harsh. That doesn't excuse aiding a frightening scene. But it does exonerate me from murder, Morton insisted. I never placed any dagger. I never intended the glass to collapse in someone's hand. Poirot held up a slender finger. Nous verrons. He signaled Japp, who had Morton removed under guard. The door closed with a definitive click. Poirot turned to us. Note, Hastings, the trap of the obvious suspect. Mr. Morton's tools and motive seem to align. Yet the dagger itself remains unaccounted for, and the minuteers are unconnected to his labor. The evidence against him is circumstantial, designed to distract us from the true architect. Miss Aldrich exhaled, wiping trembling hands against her gown. I thought it made sense. Lady Haversham pressed her fan to her lips. I prayed the culprit would be someone inconsequential, yet I feared injustice more. Mr. Pembroke spoke abruptly, but the files had crystal dust. He must have done something. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, monsieur, but the true criminal need not be the only one with powder on his hands. A craftsman can be a pawn, a convenient patsy. His gaze swept each suspect's face. We have been deceived by surface evidence. Precisely what our culprit intended. Now the real game begins. Inspector Japp frowned. Then who? Poirot held up a slender hand. Patience. We shall retrace our steps. Begin with the torn menu, Hastings. Determine whose hand holds knowledge of its missing lines. I stood and bowed. Yes, monsieur. As I withdrew, I heard Poirot's quiet reflection. The first false lead often conceals a second, more perilous trap. In the empty corridor I paused, heart pounding. The flicker of gas lamps cast moving shadows. Somewhere beyond lay the torn verses, perhaps him to a secret lover or threats silenced by cunning. and I remembered Mrs. Valencia's lingering glance at Lady Haversham's monogram glass, Mr. Pembroke's rushed explanation, and the pale grace of Miss Aldrich. None were beyond suspicion, yet each wore the mask of innocence. I returned to the drawing room and found Lady Haversham alone, tracing the embossing on her hand-held fan. "Madam," I whispered, "may I ask again who had access to those silver menus before distribution?" She looked up, eyes moist. "Only myself and my closest friend, Mrs. Valencia. No one else touched them." "Thank you," I said, and slipped away toward the pantry, where I might unearth fresh connections. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The muted clink of glassware and distant footsteps faded as Poirot and I returned to the emptied salon. 2 crimes, stabbing and attempted poisoning, loomed over us like twin specters. Yet now, beyond individual motives, we sought the hidden threads that bound our suspects together. Alliances, debts, old grievances, and secret alliances. Poirot motioned toward the sideboard. "Hastings, we must map the connections. Begin with Lady Haversham and Mr. Pembroke." I nodded and approached her, seated by the tall window, eyes fixed on the garden beyond. "Madam," I began quietly, "might I ask how long you have known Mr. Pembroke?" Her fingers tightened around her fan. He and I were college acquaintances, both in the Ladies' Society of Classics at Oxford. Years ago, we collaborated on a lecture tour. She paused. We ended our partnership abruptly when he accused me of plagiarizing my own paper. She smiled wanly. A baseless charge, but it cost me credibility. This revelation painted Pembroke's earlier defensiveness in a new light. He had praised honesty, yet perhaps nursed a secret grudge against her. I returned to Poirot, who was untying the ribbon of Miss Aldrich's menu card, inspecting the fray at its torn edge. "Next, Hastings," he said, "seek Lord Sinclair and Mrs. Valencia." We found Sinclair leaning on his crutch in the adjoining antechamber. His gaze flickered with pain and something sharper. "Lord Sinclair," Poirot began when I joined him, "you mentioned no rivalry with Miss Aldrich, yet her family's estate abuts yours. Is there any past transaction between your families?" Sinclair's lips thinned. "My late father loaned the Aldrich Trust a considerable sum 15 years ago. They defaulted, and we foreclosed on part of their land." He met my eyes. "Miss Aldrich's prosperity rests on my family's misfortune." I scribbled notes. A clear motive for envy, and perhaps revenge. Already, Miss Aldrich's nervous reaction to Perrin's suggestion of opportunity at the psychological trial made more sense. We sought Mrs. Valencia and found her quietly arranging cushions in the library. Poirot joined her, and I followed. "Madam," Poirot said smoothly, "the monogram flute, a gift from an admirer, caught my interest. Yet you claim no knowledge of its source. Is it true that you once encouraged Lady Haversham's young suitor, Mr. Aldrich?" Valencia's eyes narrowed. "He was a dear friend of my brother. I introduced him to Lady Haversham at a dance." She exhaled. "He adored her, but she rebuffed him kindly. Thereafter, he drifted away." Her voice softened. "He was dear to me. I hoped she would have given him more than polite thanks." This unearthed a triangular tension. Valencia, Haversham, and an admirer rejected by both. Perhaps Valencia blamed Haversham for the man's heartbreak, or worse, for driving him into debts that spelled the end of his fortune. Finally, we sought the butler, Mr. Hawthorne, who stood guard by the closed salon door. "Monsieur Hawthorne," Poirot said, "you have served Lady Haversham for many years. Tell me of your family." Hawthorne's expression flickered at the personal question. "My sister, Clara, manages the Sinclair stables," he admitted. "She was dismissed this spring after a carriage accident for which Lord Sinclair's groom blamed her." His jaw tightened. "She lost her livelihood. The Sinclair family offered no aid." The butler's rigid loyalty suddenly took on a rawer edge. A brother seeking redress, a servant nursing resentment. As we reconvened by the sideboard, Poirot surveyed our revelations. "See how the lines intersect," he said. "Lady Haversham and Pembroke share academic betrayal. Lord Sinclair and Miss Aldrich are bound by land and legacy. Mrs. Valencia's unrequited affection ties her to Haversham's confidences. And Hawthorne's family was wronged by Sinclair." He tapped the bell jar covering Sinclair's flute. Into these fabrications, our murder wove the initial crime to obscure deeper rancors. But now we know who stands to benefit. Pembroke from discrediting Haversham, Aldrich from Sinclair's ruin, Valencia from Haversham's emotional distress, and Hawthorne from Sinclair's downfall. I hesitated before voicing the thought that crept into my mind. But could any one person hold all these grievances? Or have they conspired? Poirot's gaze met mine, gleaming with quiet excitement. Ah, a conspiracy, an intriguing possibility, Hastings. Yet note the second crime. The poison was delivered with intimate knowledge of refreshment routines. Only one who arranged the tea knew of Valencia's involvement with the sugar and of Haversham's custom blend. Our culprit must stand at the nexus of these connections. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Consider Mrs. Valencia. She knew of the secret admirer and ceded the sugar before returning control to the footman. But she lacks reason to harm Miss Aldrich unless to distract us. Consider Mr. Hawthorne. He had access to all the tableware and sugar sachets, but his resentment alone would not motivate a love poison. He held up a finger. We must delve deeper into alibis and cross-reference times when each suspect moved between the salon and the refreshment room. But for now, map these connections in your mind, a web of betrayals, each thread leading to a potential betrayer. I nodded, feeling both exhilaration and dread. The masked ball of civility had slipped, revealing the hidden architecture of motive. Each suspect's secret loomed like a pillar of accusation. Yet within that edifice lay the true architect of both crimes, waiting for just the right moment to strike again. As Poirot turned to gather his notes, I realized that the next move will be the most delicate, to weave these hidden connections into a trap that only the guilty could enter. The game had grown complex, but the path to truth lay ahead, illuminated by the interlocking shadows of our suspects' pasts. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. The hush of midnight had settled upon Lady Haversham's estate when Poirot and I reconvened in the salon, its once elegant air now a tapestry of suspicion. Flickering candles cast dancing shadows against the walls, and the polished parquet reflected the quiet intensity of Poirot's gaze. After tracing tangled motives and alliances, he signaled me toward the side table where the remains of the sugar sachets lay, their corners peculiarly punctured. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot whispered, leaning close. "The holes in these sugar packets are too neat to be accidental. Do you not see how each is a perfect circle, scarcely larger than the pin's head?" I bent to examine the fragments, nudging one piece with a fingertip. The puncture was impeccably round. "A needle," I murmured, "or a hatpin." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Precisely. And yet which hatpin? Note that only one lady present wore a corsage studded with hatpins, Mrs. Valencia." He swept his gaze upward, recalling how she had removed her hat upon entering the drawing room, tucking it beneath her arm as she moved. I looked back at the samples. But Lady Haversham also bore a pin fan decoration. Could she not have perforated packets? Perhaps, Poirot conceded. But the diameter here matches the smallest of Mrs. Valencia's pins, the one with the jeweled top I observed glinting at her wrist just before the toasts. Intriguing that she removed it and carried it discreetly in her glove. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Even in silence, I felt the hairs on my neck stiffen. "Yet," he continued softly, "one might argue that any careful hand could wield such a tool. We require confirmation." Poirot rose and retrieved a menu card fragment from his pocket, the piece torn from the bottom of Lady Haversham's verse. He held it to candlelight, examining the jagged edge. "The tear here," he mused, "bears the same curve as the fan's lace edge. But look closer." He tilted the card, revealing a faint impression of monogram pressed into the paper margins, an inverted V, with twin curls at its apex. I recognized the flourish immediately. "The same motif on Mrs. Valencia's letter opener," I said. "She showed it to me when I delivered her tea, etched with her own initials." Poirot smiled thinly. "Indeed, she placed it atop this very card while selecting who should receive the invitations to tonight's gathering. Then, when the menu cards were returned to the salon, she had the perfect pretext to remove the bottom section under guise of adjusting the set table." He set down the card and moved toward the mantel, where the brass lamp still stood. Its wick guard was now straight, the last vestige of wax removed during cleanup. Poirot pressed a finger into the lamp's base, retrieving a sliver of hardened wax. "This, too," he said, "carries the unmistakable scent of bergamot, Mrs. Valencia's signature perfume." I inhaled. The fragrance was faint, yet unmistakable in the still air. So she circled the salon, dabbing the lamp guard to collect wax, then borrowed the sugar sachets to puncture them with her hatpin, and even mutilated the menus with her letter opener. Poirot nodded. But we must proceed with caution. Evidence so neatly aligned can be contrived, planted by a clever mind seeking to misdirect. Yet the convergence of hatpin, letter opener, and perfume is no accident. He turned and beckoned me to the window, where frost had begun to settle on the outer pane. From outside came the distant roll of thunder, an ominous accompaniment. "The true test," he said, "will be to confront Mrs. Valencia in such a manner that her defenses crumble. But for now, this secret clue belongs to us alone. We shall watch how she behaves when iced by the knowledge that her tools have been unmasked. She will slip, Hastings. She cannot conceal perfection under such scrutiny." As he spoke, the salon door creaked, and Inspector Japp entered, eyes wary. "Monsieur Poirot, we have the valet's statement. He confirms that only Mrs. Valencia moved the sugar sachets after the flutes were examined, and that Lady Haversham's canister remained sealed until served." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Inspector. That supports our observation." He rose, brushing dust from his lapels. "Japp, prepare a tray of new sugar packets, unopened and intact. Place them before Mrs. Valencia when she returns. Ask her to pierce one open for the doctor's demonstration." Japp blinked. "You wish a demonstration?" Poirot's lips curved. "A simple act. Let her perforate a packet under our eyes and compare the whole to those in evidence. The shape is distinct, mon ami. It will reveal the secret hand." Japp nodded, impressed. "Very well." Poirot turned back to me. "Remember, Hastings, we are not yet ready to reveal the whole. We arm ourselves with certainty before the accusation. Until then, our secret clue will guide the final confrontation." I nodded, heart pounding. In the flickering lamplight, I saw his expression shift from triumph to solemn determination. The hunt was nearing its climax. He carried within his mind the kernel of truth that would soon burst forth, exposing the mind games behind both crimes. Together, we left the salon, Poirot's cane tapping softly on the parquet, as thunder rumbled over the estate and the midnight hour grew still. Within the walls of Lady Haversham's home, only one question remained. Would the real culprit reveal herself in her next move, or would she retreat further into the darkness of her concealed guilt? Chapter 11. Tensions rise. The salon's atmosphere, once cold with suspicion, grew oppressively charged as the hour deepened. Candlelight danced across faces etched with unease, and every shuffle of silk or scrape of shoe against parquet seemed magnified. Poirot stood near the sideboard, arms folded, observing the gathered suspects who now eyed one another with sharpened wariness. Lady Haversham sat rigidly on the chaise, her fan stilled against her breast. Lord Sinclair, crutch at his side, leaned forward, jaw clenched. Miss Aldridge hovered by the window, knuckles white upon the sill. Mr. Pembroke paced in measured circles, cane in hand, while Mr. Hawthorne stood near the door, posture impeccably straight, yet eyes darting. Mrs. Valencia remained conspicuously absent, anticipated to join shortly, though her late return only fueled the other's suspicions. Poirot cleared his throat, drawing every gaze. "Mess Amos, it appears our evening's events have frayed the bonds of civility. I propose we allow one another a brief respite before concluding our inquiry. In the meantime, I invite you to share any observations you may not have previously disclosed." A brittle stillness followed. Then Mr. Pembroke halted mid-stride and spoke with forced calm. I have something to confess. Earlier, I whispered to Miss Aldridge about the wax on her glass. I feared it might have been something more sinister, but I failed to act swiftly enough. For that, I apologize." His eyes flicked to Miss Aldridge, who inclined her head in acknowledgment. Miss Aldridge swallowed, and then raised her voice. "In honesty, I too withheld information. When I saw Mrs. Valencia leaning over the sideboard, I did not mention it immediately. I thought perhaps I misunderstood what I saw. For that, I am sorry. She glanced toward the door as though expecting Valencia's arrival. Lady Haversham's lips trembled. I owe an apology as well. I underestimated the gravity of these events, believing a simple discussion would suffice. I did not secure the salon properly after the first incident. That lapse may have allowed further tampering. She raised a gloved hand. I regret my oversight. A low murmur passed among the men. Lord Sinclair cleared his throat. I too erred. I retrieved my glass from the lamp area before returning to my seat, agitated and unthinking. I realized now the danger of handling the same instruments twice. He pressed his bandaged hand to his chest. I regret causing distress. All eyes turned to Mr. Hawthorne. The butler's face remained impassive, but his fingers, clasped behind his back, trembled. I should have supervised the refreshment arrangements more carefully, he admitted softly. I allowed a moment's complacency. I regret that, above all, the confessions, though forced, seemed to lighten the room's tension until a muffled click sounded at the far door. Mrs. Valencia entered, gloved fingers clutching her velvet cloak. The moment she crossed the threshold, every head turned. Poirot inclined his head warmly. Madam, we are relieved by your return. His tone was courteous but businesslike. Pray, join us. Valencia's cool composure held firm, though a tremor flickered in her eyes as she surveyed the circle of admissions. She moved to the hearth's edge. I understand confessions are in fashion, she said softly, voice veiled. Yet I have naught to add but my sympathy for Miss Aldridge. Her gaze lingered on the faint stain near the carpet's edge. I only wish the evening had unfolded differently. Miss Aldridge's face flamed. You too, madam, stood by the sideboard when I approached the lamp. Her voice shook with accusation. You could have intervened, yet you left me vulnerable. Valencia's eyes narrowed. I had no wish to alarm an honored guest. She addressed Lady Haversham. Madam, you entrusted me with your possessions, the sugar, the tea, the very linens. If any ingredient were compromised, it would have been revealed sooner. She turned to Pembroke. And you, monsieur, you watched the wax smudge but remained silent. Why would you not protect me? Pembroke's posture stiffened. I am not your protector, he retorted. And yet, unlike you, I spoke when it seemed necessary. A sharp intake of breath came from Hawthorne, who stepped forward. Perhaps we ought to consider that the murderer intended exactly this, to fracture our trust so that we turn on one another rather than seek the true culprit. His remark, spoken without inflection, struck the group with equal measures of clarity and dismay. Lady Haversham pressed her hand to her throat. He is correct. We are entangled in a web of suspicion, but we must not snap at each other before we catch the spider. Sinclair hobbled to the window, pressing his hand to the glass as if to steady himself. We know more now than we did at the outset, yet the crimes grow bolder. He met Poirot's gaze. Will you continue tonight, monsieur? Poirot smiled gently, stepping forward. Yes, monseigneur. But first, let us test one another's honesty further. He produced a small tray bearing the unopened sugar sachets Jap had prepared. I ask each of you to examine these, then break one before me, that we may observe the perforation. The shape of the hole will confirm whether the very tool I suspect was used. A hush descended. One by one, they approached. Lady Haversham's hole was irregular, as though torn by impatient fingers. Lord Sinclair showed signs of bent paper at one edge. Miss Aldridge's was slightly oval. Mr. Pembroke's bore split fibers. Hawthorne's was clean but uneven. Finally, Mrs. Valencia approached, her gloved hand poised. She extracted the tiniest packet and pierced it with a hatpin, holding it aloft. The hole was a perfect circle, identical to those from the crime scene. A collective intake of breath echoed. Valencia's eyes shone with sudden apprehension. Pembroke took a step back. Lady Haversham covered her mouth. Hawthorne's posture slackened. Sinclair furrowed his brow. Aldridge trembled. Poirot offered no comment, merely watched, allowing the truth to settle. In the charged silence, Valencia dropped the pin into her gloved hand. Her face as pale as the moonlight filtering through the drapes. I used this to open the sachet, she admitted in a voice so quiet it trembled, but only because my own tea was too tightly sealed. Poirot inclined his head. The shape matches exactly. He held forth the sachet fragments. The same tool used to perforate the sugar was used to deliver the poison. He paused, gaze fixed upon Valencia's quivering form. Yet you claim innocence. Why? Did you not realize your actions risked another's life? Valencia looked around as though seeing the room for the first time. Faces etched with shock and betrayal. I swear, she whispered, voice cracking. I only intended to tear the bottom from the menus and perhaps embarrass Lady Havisham. I did not place poison. I did not wish harm. Poirot's eyes softened yet remained unyielding. Your tool, your access, your motive of wounded pride, all point to you, but you deny the poison. The question remains, who used your breach to commit the second crime? As lightning flashed beyond the windows, illuminating the tense tableau, I realized that Valencia's revelation was only the beginning of a storm. Second leads fractured, alliances splintered, and the true villain lurked beyond even this disclosure. The tension, now fully palpable, crackled like the air before thunder, a prelude to the final reckoning. Chapter 12. The confrontation. Poirot directed us back into the salon, its once brilliant chandeliers now dimmed to a soft, expectant glow. The six suspects assembled in a reluctant semicircle. Lady Havisham, her fan resting unopened, Lord Sinclair, leaning heavily on his crutch, Miss Aldrich, hands woven tight in her lap, Mr. Pembroke, eyes darting, Mrs. Valencia, shoulders tense, and Mr. Hawthorne, the butler, rigid as ever. Inspector Jaff stood to one side, ready to enforce silence. Poirot cleared his throat. Mess Amos, you have all confessed errors of judgment and revealed tools used in these crimes. Yet one among you has suffered false accusation, while the true architect remains at large. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. It is time to apply gentle pressure and see whose resolve cracks. He turned first to Mr. Hawthorne. Monsieur le Majordome, you have served Lady Havisham loyally, but I recall you retrieving flowers from conservatory earlier this evening. Hawthorne's shoulders stiffened. Yes, monsieur. Poirot walked the floral arrangement still perched on the side table. These blossoms, he said, touching a pale dogwood petal, were arranged by you, yet I found, in the lamp wax, a faint scent of oleander. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. Oleander, he repeated, voice low. I chose dogwood because Lady Havisham preferred its fragrance. His gaze flicked to the lamp guard. I would never bring oleander indoors. It is poisonous. Poirot inclined his head. Precisely why the scent remained hidden in the wax residue. The murderer selected a flower potent both in beauty and danger. But who among us had knowledge of oleander's potency and access to these blossoms? He turned to Mrs. Valencia. You, madam, carry botanical interests and might know every bloom secret, yet you deny bringing any such flowers. She swallowed, lips parted to speak, then closed her mouth and remained silent. Poirot shifted his attention to Lord Sinclair. Monseigneur, you mentioned your family's horticultural past. Could you not identify oleander at a glance? Sinclair's face grew pale. I know only roses, he stammered. I never attended to these arrangements. Miss Aldrich tightened her grip on the windowsill. Pembroke's knuckles whitened around his cane. Valencia's eyes flicked between the butler and the detective. Poirot raised a slender finger. It is too convenient to blame knowledge of flowers on a passion for botany. The true sign lies in the use of the lamp wax as a carrier. Only one individual handled that lamp guard after your interviews. Hastings, who was it? He looked to me. I hesitated, then spoke. Mr. Hawthorne polished it before replacing the shade. Hawthorne's shoulders slumped. He closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. I did polish it, yes, he admitted, but I never touched the sugar packets. His voice cracked. Why do you press me, monsieur? Poirot's gaze was steady. Because the same wax bore bergamot oil, Mrs. Valencia's perfume, yet the olfactory trace of oleander too strong to be accidental. He paused. Monsieur Hawthorne, did you not taste the sugar when preparing tea? Hawthorne's lips trembled. I sampled the grain to ensure sweetness. It was bitter, so I dismissed it. He shook his head. I thought the sugar was stale. And yet, Poirot pressed, you did not discard it. You accepted it as a mere fault in provisions. That is odd, is it not? Hawthorne opened his mouth, closed it, then took a trembling step forward. I did not wish to cause alarm. I believed it a household error. Poirot circled him. Hawthorne, you told me your sister was dismissed from the Sinclair stables. You nurse resentment against Lord Sinclair's family. You stand to gain from his ruin. He fixed the butler with a look. You had access to the sugar, the lamp, and knowledge from your valet's whisperings. Why not exact revenge under the guise of a deranged suitor? Hawthorne's breath quickened. He looked pleadingly at Lady Havisham. I did not wish for anyone to die, he croaked. I only meant a disgrace, that the Sinclair name would suffer and my sister might be rehired under his contrition. He glanced at the scattered menu fragments. The torn lines. I thought to implicate Lady Havisham, to tarnish her reputation. And the sugar. I meant merely to embarrass Miss Aldridge, not to harm her. A charged silence followed. Mrs. Valencia stepped forward, voice shaking. He speaks truth of motive, but not of outcome. Only one person knew, to combine poison with a broken flute. She pointed at Mr. Pembroke. It was you who fetched the dagger from your dressing room. Under the pretext of mending it, you then placed it in the flute stem. Pembroke's face blanched, but he brushed past her. Preposterous, he snapped. I did not move from the salon after my interview. His cane tapped sharply. I was with Lady Havisham, discussing the verse. Lady Havisham's eyes widened. He is right. Pembroke never left my side. She looked to Poirot. He would have no chance. Poirot nodded. Timing is crucial. We shall reconstruct movements. But for now, Monsieur Hawthorne, your confession to tampering with the sugar and menu stands. Yet the poison and dagger remain in the shadows. We have forced the spider into the open. Now we await its final panic. He turned to the group. You see how their deceptions frayed under pressure. Soon, the one whose resolve is weakest will reveal the final piece. As Hawthorne sank into a chair, trembling, the others clustered together in murmured conversation. The tension, now a living thing, pulsed through the room. Each breath held the promise of revelation or of further deceit, and Poirot, ever composed, simply watched, certain that the final act would unfold in the next crucial moment. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The tension in Lady Havisham's salon had barely begun to settle when a sudden commotion rippled through the side door. A loud thump, followed by hurried footsteps on the polished parquet, announced someone fleeing in panic. Poirot and I sprang from our positions by the sideboard as Mrs. Valencia burst through the door, cloak swirling her fan and the glint of a jeweled hatpin clutched in her trembling hand. Before anyone could react, she darted toward the window, flinging it open with a desperate shove. No! Poirot called, but his voice was swallowed by the crack of thunder overhead. Mrs. Valencia stepped onto the narrow sill, rain-slicked garden visible beyond the pane, then turned with wild eyes, let her open her rays as though to strike at those who would stop her. Inspector Japp lunged forward, but Mrs. Valencia sidestepped and sprinted toward the French doors leading to the terrace. She tore them open, flooding the room with damp moonlight, and vanished into the stormy night. After her! Japp roared, drawing his truncheon. The constables surged through the doors, but Poirot placed a restraining hand on Japp's arm. Not so hastily, he whispered. She intends to flee, yes, but she remains within this estate. Let us consider her path. I seized Poirot's meaning and rushed to the open window. Below, the gravel drive gleamed under lantern light, and beyond it, the waiting carriages lay damp and idle. Poirot stepped to the center of the salon, raising his voice with calm authority. Mesdames et messieurs, do not pursue blindly. Observe where she fled, through the terrace doors past the library. Intercept her at the carriage portico. He turned to Japp. You and 2 constables guard the front entrance. I shall intercept her by the east wing corridor. Hastings, remain here and clue me in if she attempts another route. Japp and the officers dashed past us, while Poirot and I slipped to the library. skirts of fabric whispering against bookcases. We could hear distant shouts as the other footmen and servants rallied to block exits. The corridor beyond smelled of polished wood and damp stone from the open terrace doors. At the corridor's fork, Poirot paused and drew from his waistcoat a folded menu fragment, the torn edge bearing the inverted impression. "Note, Hastings," he said quietly, "that our fleeing lady carries a letter opener used to scar the menu. She will not discard it easily." He slipped the fragment into his breast pocket and tapped his cane twice on the floor. His signal to me. We rounded the corner and glimpsed Mrs. Valencia's cloak disappearing around the entry to the carriage portico. Poirot moved with surprising speed for a man of his stature, and we burst into the dimly lit portico just as Mrs. Valencia reached the nearest carriage. Its door ajar. A footman raised his lantern. "Madam, you cannot depart." The lamps cast long, quivering shadows across her trembling form as she paused, hand on the carriage door. Poirot stepped forward, voice calm but insistent. "Madame Valencia, you must desist. There is nowhere to go." She turned, eyes wild, voice quavering. I cannot stay. They will accuse me of murder." "Then you shall have your chance to speak the truth," Poirot replied. He reached out, gently closing the carriage door and placing a hand over her gloved wrist. "But not tonight and not thus." Mrs. Valencia's composure shattered. She wrenched her hand free and produced a hatpin, pointing its jeweled tip at Poirot as though to threaten him. "Stay back. I will defend myself." Poirot held up his free hand, palm outward. "Madam, put away the hatpin. You serve no purpose with violence now." Her voice broke into sobs. It was never meant to end in blood. She rocked on her heels, cloak billowing. "I only wish to scare them, to expose their vanities. But Sinclair, Aldridge, they do not deserve my wrath." Poirot's expression softened. "Then tell us what truly transpired. We know you perforated the sugar and slit the menus, but the poison and the dagger, those were not your doing. Confess what you overheard, who guided your hand." She hesitated, tears glistening on her lashes. Behind her, the carriage lamps flickered in the storm. I saw the letter opener's reflection catch in the lantern light on her cloak. Inspector Japp and the constables arrived at a trot, their footsteps echoing against the stone. Japp halted beside the carriage, breathless. "We secured the west gate as well, monsieur. No escape that way." Poirot turned to Japp. "Thank you, Inspector. You see, Madame Valencia, flight is unnecessary. Speak now, and you may yet spare yourself further torment." The hatpin trembled in her hand. She dropped it to the ground with a metallic chime. "Very well," she whispered, voice choked. "I will tell all I overheard." Poirot inclined his head. "Proceed." Mrs. Valencia's gaze shifted among us, to the butler's rigid stance, to Miss Aldridge's pale despair, to Lord Sinclair's watchful eyes, and finally to Pembroke's clenched jaw. "When I went to adjust the lamp," she began, voice steadier, "I listened at the door. I heard a whispered conversation between Lord Sinclair and Mr. Pembroke." She paused, swallowing. "Pembroke threatened Sinclair's reputation if he did not support Pembroke's political ambitions. Sinclair refused. They argued about money and influence. Then Pembroke said something like, 'You will regret opposing me.' Soon afterward, I saw Pembroke slip the dagger from his dressing room. At her words, a murmur ran through the small crowd gathering under the lanterns. Poirot's small gray cells flickered in triumph. "Now we have the true confrontation," he murmured. "Observe their faces." Lord Sinclair's pale lips parted in shock. Pembroke's eyes widened, cane clattering against the stone. Japp stepped forward. "Mr. Pembroke, you will accompany me." As the constables moved to detain him, Pembroke glanced at Poirot with a broken expression. The carriage lamps cast a stark light on his drawn features. Poirot turned to me, voice low. "Thus, Hastings, the desperate escape leads us to the heart of the crime. The final piece emerges not from forced confession, but from panic's revelation. In the rain-drenched portico, among carriage wheels and lantern light, the true culprit's mask fell at last, revealed by the desperation of flight that proved impossible. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The storm had passed, leaving the ground slick with rain, and the air charged with aftermath. In Lady Haversham's salon, only the softest of a relit heater punctuated the heavy silence. Inspector Japp stood near the door, steel cuff in hand, ready to escort Mr. Pembroke to the station. The remaining 4 suspects, Lady Haversham, Lord Sinclair, Miss Aldridge, and Mr. Hawthorne, formed a guarded circle, their expressions taut with uncertainty. Mrs. Valencia lingered at the window, cloak damp and discarded on a nearby chair. Poirot rose from his place beside the sideboard, where the smashed champagne flute lay under its bell jar. He carried with him a single fragment of crystal, one of several he had collected since the night's first crime. The fragment bore a faint, crescent-shaped indentation near its rim. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, voice calm yet resonant, "we have witnessed confessions, a false arrest, a desperate flight, and a true culprit unmasked in panic. Yet before we bid Mr. Pembroke farewell, there remains one final detail to secure our understanding of this affair." He held the crystal shard between thumb and forefinger, tilting it toward the lamp. The crescent indentation glinted. Observe the curve of this mark. It is not random. The shape corresponds precisely to the head of a cane. He set the shard on a small velvet cloth atop the sideboard and turned to Mr. Pembroke. The ex-politician's shoulders sagged, but he managed a defiant stare. "I have nothing more to confess." Poirot inclined his head. "Very well. Let us test this impression." He beckoned to Inspector Japp, who retrieved Pembroke's cane from a stand. Poirot examined the ivory knob, tracing its rim with a gloved fingertip. "Voir," he breathed. "The same crescent curve sits here, worn by frequent tapping." He tapped the cane lightly on the cloth, reproducing the indentation on the crystal as though stamping a seal. The mark was identical. Poirot stepped back, gaze unwavering. "Monsieur Pembroke, you held that flute in this very hand, tapping it to steady your nerves as the champagne was served. You left the impression that disfigured the crystal stem. You alone possess both motive and means to fashion the flute into a weapon." Pembroke's face drained the color. He turned to Lady Haversham, voice shaking. I never meant to kill Sinclair. I only wished to frighten him into supporting my bill in Parliament. The blade was dulled, meant to pierce his sleeve, not his flesh." His voice cracked. "Then I did not anticipate the glass would shatter as it did." Poirot folded his arms. "The blade was new, Mistress Haversham's gift to embellish your collection, engraved with that family crest, and you lent it to him under the guise of polishing. Monsieur Pembroke knew its origin, having heard of you receiving it that afternoon." He pointed to the dagger, now laid beside the flute. "You returned to collect that same blade after the first crime, to conceal it in your study. It remained there until you retrieved it again tonight." Pembroke sank into a nearby chair, head bowed. Inspector Japp stepped forward, securing the politician's hands in cuffs. "You're under arrest for the murder of Lord Sinclair and the attempted murder of Miss Aldridge." At the word arrest, a collective gasp echoed through the room. Lady Haversham covered her face with a trembling hand. Lord Sinclair's bandaged hand flew to his chest in relief. Miss Aldridge let out a breath she seemed to have held since midnight. Only Hawthorne remained impassive, as though reaffirmed in his loyalty. Poirot addressed the assembled group once more. "Thus, the final piece has fallen into place. The imprint of ambition upon crystal, revealing the hand that wielded both dagger and deception." He paused, allowing the weight of the revelation to settle. "I thank you all for your patience, and for demonstrating how the smallest detail may illuminate the grandest design." Mrs. Valencia stepped forward, voice soft. "Monsieur Poirot, I owe you my gratitude and my apologies for my own missteps. I never foresaw the chaos I would unleash when I sought only to embarrass." She brushed a damp curl from her face. "Nor did I suspect the game would turn so deadly." Poirot inclined his head courteously. "Madam, your involvement served to reveal greater truths. Yet I trust you will henceforth confine your intrigues to poetry rather than peril." He closed his gaze upon Pembroke one final time. "And you, monsieur, shall explain your, shall we say, political strategy to His Majesty's peace officers." As the constables led Pembroke away, the salon's tension dissolved into a quiet solemnity. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking the passage from nightmare to resolution. I stood beside Poirot, heart pounding with admiration. He pressed my shoulder gently. "Hastings, our task is complete. The little gray cells have prevailed." Outside, the first light of dawn filtered through the rain-washed windows, casting the salon in pale relief. Within, the shattered flute and the crumpled menus lay as silent witnesses to a night when ambition broke crystal and spilled blood, until only truth remained unbroken. Chapter 15, The Final Gathering. The salon, restored to its stately grandeur, seemed to hold its breath as Poirot arranged the remaining 5 around the central carpet. Only Lady Havisham, Lord Sinclair, Miss Aldridge, Mrs. Valencia, and Mr. Hawthorne remained. Monsieur Pembroke's departure in handcuffs had sent a ripple of relief through the marble halls, yet the true resolution still lay ahead. Outside, the first pale light of dawn crept over the manicured gardens, but inside, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Poirot stood at the head of the circle, cane in one hand, notebook in the other. He addressed them in a measured tone that brooked no interruption. "Mesdames et messieurs, I thank you for your patience and your candor. We have witnessed a broken flute, a stabbed hand, an attempted poisoning, a false arrest, and a desperate flight. Now, let us reconstruct the order of events, step by step, so that the truth may emerge from this tapestry of deception." He tapped his cane on the carpet, marking the first point. At precisely 9 o'clock, the initial toast was proposed. Each guest raised a flute. Lord Sinclair's glass, engraved with his crest, bore a secret incision made earlier by a higher craftsman. Under that imperceptible file mark, the brittle crystal would fracture under minimal pressure. He turned to Mr. Hawthorne. "You polished those glasses, monsieur, yet did not detect a flaw until too late." Hawthorne inclined his head. "I failed to notice the precise depth of the cut." Poirot continued, tracing an imaginary line on the floor. When Sinclair lifted the glass, the incision opened like a seam. The blade hidden within the flute stem severed his skin as the crystal split. Guests recoiled. Lady Havisham herself attended to his wound. He paused, eyes on Valencia. During that commotion, the menus were torn and the sugar sachets discreetly punctured. Mrs. Valencia closed her eyes. I admit to using my hatpin and letter opener. My intention was to embarrass, not to kill. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Your actions provided cover. While all eyes turned to Mrs. Valencia's theatrics, wax smears burned edges. You walked unobserved to the tea caddy. Only one person would know the precise moment to lace the sugar. He tapped the pills of paper in his hand. With a tincture of oleander, he lifted the sachet fragments for them to see. Miss Aldridge's lips parted in silent horror. Lady Havisham clasped her fan so tightly it creaked. Lord Sinclair's injured hand shook in its splint. Hawthorne's expression tightened, his loyalty warring with shame. Poirot pressed on. Shortly after the first crime, our poor Miss Aldridge sought refreshment and unwittingly consumed the tainted sugar. She collapsed, yet survived by sheer providence. That second crime proved our murderer's boldness, and perhaps panic when discovered. He looked to Hawthorne. You claim to taste the sugar and remark upon its bitterness, yet you replace the sachet unharmed. A curious decision for an innocent man. Hawthorne's rigid composure wavered. He bowed his head. I thought it a household mistake. Only in hindsight did I recognize the danger. Poirot nodded, though his gaze remained steady. In the interim, a false lead sent Mr. Morton to his cell. A diversion you orchestrated with the craftsman's tools and debts in mind. Then Mrs. Valencia's flight nearly unmasked herself, but your panic only confirmed your role in menu and sugar tampering. He paused to let that sink in. The group fell silent, absorbing the weight of his words. Even the crackle of the fireplace seemed distant compared to the rhythm of hearts beating in tense anticipation. Poirot tapped his cane again. Yet one final question remains. Who combined the secret incision with the dagger and the sugar, and who had the motive not only to disgrace but to ensure death? He allowed their faces to register hope and dread in equal measure. He circled them, cane tracing invisible lines. Lady Havisham, you stood to lose your reputation. Lord Sinclair, you owed no love for the Aldridge inheritance. Miss Aldridge, you resented Sinclair's foreclosures. Mrs. Valencia, You nursed wounded pride. And Mr. Hawthorne, you sought retribution for your sister. Each of you had reason to engineer scandal. Few had the means to convert refinement into murder. His gaze lifted, holding them all. Now, one by one, I shall ask you to recall precisely where you stood, what you touched, and which tool you wielded. In the end, only one sequence of actions aligns perfectly with the evidence. He returned to the sideboard, placing a broken menu, a sugar sachet, and a shard of crystal on display. He turned back. Let's begin with the moment the candle dripped wax upon Miss Aldridge's glass. Then proceed to the sugar, the menu tear, and the crystal fracture. Speak truly, and the shadow will recede. Speak falsely, and you will reveal yourself. A hush enveloped the room as each prepared to answer. The final gathering was not merely a retelling, but a crucible in which the guilty would be forced to speak the truth. In the soft glow of dawn, the last piece of the puzzle lay poised to fall, and with it, the murderer's mask would shatter forever. Chapter 16, The Reveal. The circle in Lady Haversham's salon tightened as dawn's pale light crept between the drawn drapes. Poirot stood at the center, his posture unyielding, little gray cells fully engaged. Around him, Lady Haversham sat with trembling composure. Lord Sinclair, cane in hand, watched with wary relief. Miss Aldridge leaned forward, eyes bright with anticipation. Mrs. Valencia clutched her fan, face drawn, and Mr. Hawthorne, his butler's mask faltering, shifted uneasily. Inspector Japp hovered beside the door, ready to act on Poirot's final pronouncement. Poirot raised a slender finger, drawing their undivided attention. Mesdames et messieurs, you have revisited every moment of this evening, from the wax smear to the fractured crystal, yet only one sequence of actions accounts for every evidence fragment. He paused, letting silence accentuate the gravity. Now I shall expose the truth. He began by placing the broken menu card on the sideboard. Item 1, the torn verse. The bottom of this menu was removed not by zeal but by design, to conceal the words praising Lady Haversham's loyalty. The tool? Mrs. Valencia's letter opener, bearing the inverted V motif, pressed onto the card under the guise of adjusting the table linens. He looked to Valencia. Madam, you confess this, yet your motive was wounded pride, not murder. Next, he held up a sugar sachet fragment. Item 2, the perforated sugar. The holes matched precisely the tip of your jeweled hatpin. Also confessed. Yet the potion itself, oleander extract, was not your doing. You did not possess nor prepare such poison. Valencia's shoulders slumped, tears welling. I sought only to embarrass monsieur. Poirot laid down the sachet and retrieved the crystal shard. Item 3, the secret incision. Notice the crescent mark at the flute's rim, a duplication of Mr. Pembroke's ivory cane knob. Monsieur Pembroke tapped his glass during the toast, creating that exact indentation. He picked up Pembroke's cane from its stand and pressed its knob against the shard's indentation. The match was flawless. He turned to Pembroke, who sat frozen. You possess a blade, the family dagger, originally a decorative gift, and the means to hide it within the flute stem. You arranged for craftsman Mr. Morton to create imperceptible file marks 2 days hence, under the guise of polishing Lady Haversham's new crystal. You then retrieved the subtly damaged flute moments before the toast and hid the dagger inside. Lord Sinclair's eyes widened. You did that to me? Pembroke bowed his head. Yes, your opposition in Parliament threatened my ambitions. When you refused to support my bill, I resolved to force your hand. I never intended to kill you, only to frighten, to secure your allegiance. His voice cracked, but the glass shattered too cleanly. Poirot nodded gravely. The miscalculation of Crystal's brittleness turned your scare into violence. And when Miss Aldridge fell victim to the oleander lace sugar, placed not by you but opportunistically by Mr. Hawthorne's earlier sampling, you blamed your own panic on her collapse. He leaned forward. Monsieur Hawthorne, you did not know the poison's nature. You tasted the sugar, found it bitter, and replaced it. Yet it remained lethal. You, too, are not the culprit. Hawthorne exhaled, relief mingling with remorse. Miss Aldridge pressed her hands to her mouth. I owe you my life, she said softly to Poirot. Poirot returned to Pembroke. Finally, You attempted to frame more on the craftsman's debts and tools, then feigned outrage when Mrs. Valencia fled, drawing attention away from your study where you hid the dagger. He paused, letting that settle. All evidence converged upon your carefully orchestrated plan, until a single shard of crystal and the cane's imprint betrayed you. He tapped his cane on the floor. Justice for Lord Sinclair's wound and for Miss Aldridge's near poisoning demands accountability. Inspector Japp, I believe all pieces are now in place. Japp stepped forward, his notebook ready. Monsieur Pembroke, you stand accused of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. You will come with me. Pembroke rose, shoulders heavy with defeat. As Japp snapped the cuff shut, he looked to Lady Havisham. I am sorry for your salon's ruin. His voice cracked on the final word. Lady Havisham inclined her head. May you learn the cost of broken trust. Her tone was gentle, yet implacable. Miss Aldridge stood and approached Sinclair, offering her hand, which he took with grateful eyes. Mrs. Valencia crossed to Consul Hawthorne, who accepted her comfort with a bowed head. Poirot surveyed the group, eyes softening. Let this be a lesson, Amias Amos. The smallest detail, an indentation in crystal, a puncture in paper, a drop of poison, can unlock the darkest intentions. But it is a unity of evidence, pursued without prejudice, that reveals truth. He turned to me, a faint smile breaking his solemn reserve. Hastings, the little gray cells have triumphed once more. I bowed, heart swelling with admiration. The dawn light grew steadily, illuminating the room's restored elegance and the faces of those who had survived the night's trials. Poirot raised his cane in salute. And now, let us hope that this new day brings measured calm, and that the fractures of ambition, once sealed by justice, will long remain at rest. With that, the salon's tension dissolved into a quiet relief, and the early morning sun cast warmth upon the assembled company, each marked by the night's events, yet bound again by the certainty that truth, however hidden, will ultimately emerge. Chapter 17, Outcome and Justice. The morning sun warmed the salon's polished wood and cast gentle light over the assembled company. Only the faint echo of Inspector Japp's footsteps in the corridor reminded us of the world beyond Lady Haversham's drawing room. Monsieur Pembroke, his shoulders bowed beneath the weight of his actions, sat quietly on a settee, hands cuffed but face composed, as the constables prepared to escort him to the station. Poirot stood nearby, his cane resting against the sideboard. He watched Pembroke with an inscrutable expression, then addressed the group in a voice both calm and resolute. Monsieur Pembroke's fate will be determined by the courts of law in His Majesty's realm. Yet here, in this chamber of witness, justice has already been served. The innocent spared further harm, the guilty unmasked, and the bonds of trust, though tested, restored. He inclined his head to each in turn. Lady Havisham rose, smoothing her mourning gown as she approached Pembroke. Despite your betrayal, I bear no hatred for you, she said softly. May the law grant you mercy proportional to your remorse. She offered her white-gloved hand. Pembroke accepted it with a grateful yet tremulous nod. Miss Aldridge, still pale but steady, knelt beside Lord Sinclair. She brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. Your hand will heal, she murmured, glancing at the delicate bandage. But more importantly, your spirit has triumphed over malice. Sinclair managed a faint smile. Thanks to Poirot, indeed. Mrs. Valencia moved to stand beside Miss Aldridge, offering quiet comfort. Her own involvement in the evening's dramas had been significant, yet her heart had never wavered from concern for her friends. She addressed Hawthorne, who remained respectfully silent. And you, Hawthorne, you were the first to raise caution, even if too late. I owe you my gratitude for your discretion. Hawthorne inclined his head, his unflappable demeanor softened by genuine relief. Poirot, still observing, cleared his throat politely. Mess Amos, though our trial was unconventional, the outcome upholds both societal and moral justice. Pembroke's ambitions yielded ruin. Valencia's pride brought unintended peril. Hawthorne's loyalty mingled with resentment. Aldridge's fears nearly claimed her life. Sinclair endured pain and betrayal, and Lady Haversham's reputation weathered the storm. Yet through it all, the unity of truth prevailed. He motioned toward the shattered flute, now encased in a glass display on the sideboard. Let this remain as a reminder that beauty, like crystal, can conceal danger when wielded with ill intent, but also that justice, like truth, is unbreakable when pursued relentlessly. Inspector Japp stepped forward, removing his helmet and brushing back his hair. Monsieur Poirot, your deductions speak for themselves. I shall deliver the evidence and your testimony to the magistrate without delay. He extended a hand to Poirot, who accepted it with a gracious nod. The mood in the room softened. Conversation resumed in hushed, respectful tones as the guests prepared to depart. Lady Havisham offered refreshments, simple tea and plain biscuits this time, inviting us to share a moment of quiet camaraderie before the day's duties beckoned. I sat beside Poirot at a small round table, admiring the resilience of each person present. "Well done, mon ami," I said quietly. "You have brought light to every shadow." Poirot poured himself a cup of tea with delicate precision. "Hastings, it is not I who triumphs, but the principles of observation and logic. The little gray cells are merely instruments of the mind, but the heart's courage sustains our quest." I sipped my tea, the warmth spreading through me. "Do you ever tire of such dramas?" I asked, glancing around to relieve faces of Lady Havisham and her guests. Poirot's mustaches twitched. "Never, mon ami. For every case is a microcosm of the human soul, its virtues and its vices. And with every mystery unraveled, we reaffirm that justice, though sometimes delayed, is never truly defeated." From the corner, Miss Aldridge raised her cup in a gentle toast. "To justice, then, and to the bonds that survive adversity." The others smiled and followed suit, their cups chiming softly. Even Mrs. Valencia and Hawthorne exchanged a respectful nod, their earlier suspicions replaced by a shared sense of closure. As we drank, I reflected on the night's trials, the fractured glass, the poisoned sugar, the torn menus, the false accusations, and the final revelations. Each moment had tested our resolve, yet each had also revealed the strength and goodness that endure when truth is set free. Outside, the carriage wheels began to creak as Pembroke was led away, his head held with the dignity one reserves for a man remorseful yet unbroken. The dawn sky, painted with hues of rose and gold, seemed to promise renewal, not only for Lady Havisham's salon, but for every spirit within it. Poirot rose, cane in hand, and offered a slight bow to the hostess. "Madam, your gracious resilience has been an inspiration. May your salon's laughter soon return, unshadowed by peril." Lady Havisham curtsied. "I owe you everything, Monsieur Poirot." He tipped his head. "I have merely served the truth." And so, in the light of morning, with justice affirmed and friendships restored, we departed Lady Havisham's salon, each carrying the memory of a night when little gray cells vanquished darkness, and justice shone anew in the heart of society. Chapter 18. The closing remark. The salon lay quiet, its lingering tension replaced by a gentle calm. Dawn's pale light filtered through the silk drapes, illuminating the polished sideboard with the shattered flute, the stained sugar sachets, and the torn menu still lay as silent witnesses. The storm had passed both outside and within these walls, leaving in its wake a tapestry of truths examined and fates determined. Poirot stood by the hearth, cane in hand, surveying the small gathering with his trademark composure. Lady Havisham, her gown brushed to the night's perils, offered final cups of restorative tea. Lord Sinclair, his wound now cleaned and freshly bandaged, accepted a cup with nod of gratitude. Miss Aldridge, cheeks warm with recovery, poured for Mrs. Valencia, whose earlier flight had been forgiven in light of her courage. Even Mr. Hawthorne, his loyalty affirmed and his resentments laid to rest, joined the circle with quiet dignity. Poirot cleared his throat softly, drawing all eyes to him. "Mess Amos, our journey through suspicion, deceit, and near tragedy has reached its rightful conclusion. We have borne witness to how ambition can fracture the soul, how pride can poison both tea and trust, and how small acts, an incision, a perforation, a tear, may converge into a deadly design. Yet through perseverance and calm observation, we have restored order." He tapped his cane upon the parquet. "Permit me one final reflection." He stepped forward, the ever-present twinkle returning to his sharp gray eyes. "In life, We often adorn ourselves with shields of civility, polite words, elegant manners, gilded objects to conceal deeper impulses. The champagne flute, a symbol of celebration, became an instrument of violence. The sugar sachet, a token of sweetness, a vessel of poison. The menu, a promise of hospitality, a fragment of falsity. And yet beneath those facades, the little gray cells reveal the truth. Lady Havisham inclined her head. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Without your insight, I fear my evenings and my guests would never have been safe again." Her voice trembled with relief and lingering resolve. Poirot smiled graciously. "Madam, you have preserved more than your reputation tonight. You have demonstrated the resilience of honor in the face of betrayal. Your grace under fire is its own testament to virtue." He turned to Lord Sinclair. "Monseigneur, may your hand heal fully, and may this experience temper rather than embitter your spirit. Justice, though slow at times, has found its mark." Sinclair bowed respectfully. "Thanks to you, monsieur. I have learned how swiftly ambition can turn to obsession, and how steadfast reason can withstand its storm." Miss Aldridge stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Monsieur Poirot, your kindness saved my life more than once. May I hope you accept my thanks and my friendship?" He tipped his head. "Mademoiselle, it is I who am indebted to you for your courage in the face of peril. Friendship, like the truth, thrives on sincerity." Mrs. Valencia, still pale but firm, offered her hand. "And you, sir, remind us that even well-intentioned intrigues may bring harm. I shall confine my schemes to poetry henceforth." Poirot bowed again. "Your talents are admirable, madam. May they now find safer channels." Finally, he regarded Mr. Hawthorne. "Monsieur le Majordome, your steadfastness and regard for duty were a beacon in the darkness. May your loyalty continue to be rewarded by kindness rather than hardship." Hawthorne inclined his head, voice steady. "I am honored, monsieur." Poirot paused in the center of the circle, raising his cane slightly. "Mess Amos, there is one truth that this case reaffirms above all, that every crime, however intricately plotted, leaves a trace. The human mind, in its complexity, cannot conceal every motive, every misstep. It is a detective's role to see what others overlook, to piece together fragments of evidence, and to restore justice where it was broken." He allowed a moment's silence before concluding with his characteristic flourish. "And now, as the sun rises on a new day, may your hearts be light, your cups untainted, and your trust in one another and in the triumph of reason renewed. For in the words of a wiser man than I, it is the little gray cells that triumph over the grandest deceptions." With that, Poirot bowed deeply and turned, his cane tapping a gentle rhythm as he made his exit through the gilded doors. Behind him, the assembled company watched in respectful silence, each carrying within them the lessons of a night when elegance hid ambition, and only the keenest mind could pierce the veil to reveal the truth beneath.